I'm Dane Rose, a high graduate of more than 30 workshops and 100 events, and a private therapeutic patient of 4 of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators, Sarah Sandhill, Peter Sandhill, Ann Watts, and Barbara Musser, who is now resigned. I wanted to step back from the intense emotionality of being a sexual abuse survivor with a bisexual high facilitator. I've been heterosexual my whole life, Peter Sandhill, and talk a little bit about the meta-conversations of this site and what it's about for me, as well as what it might be about for you. Again, aside from the many emotional waves that it induces and invites you to participate with and learn about. The first question is one of the biggest questions that emerged for me early on in this process. As stonewalled repeatedly by Peter Sandhill, I took the entire cycle of abuse and handed it in a 45-minute recording to the entire facilitator body and board, asking for help for both myself and sensing Peter Sandhill's panic for Peter Sandhill. It was with shock and dismay that this request for help turned around into a new abuse cycle, as in the same moment, Jason Weston, having met privately without me, with Peter Sandhill, my, in this case, abuser, to come to the conclusion that the Human Awareness Institute had no responsibility for choosing, training, recommending without caveat a unlicensed high facilitator who had proceeded over a 12-year period to violate almost every container and therapeutic guideline in the book, and far from supporting the much needed healing from early childhood trauma, had reenacted it. That the Human Awareness Institute, while stating to me through every facilitator in more than 30 workshops that we are committed to transforming ignorance and fear and to a world in which everyone wins, that this did not extend to transforming their own ignorance and fear about this issue, or to me winning, or for that matter, as we will see as the site progresses, to the Human Awareness Institute itself winning. Because those of you that know anything about nonprofit ethics, about therapeutic ethics, about the ethics of medicine, be that mental, emotional, or physical, anyone who knows about good business practice and about service knows that the equation of sustainability is not we use your trust to fuck you over, we induce a life-threatening therapeutic state, I should say traumatic state. In Hay's words, it might be therapy, but we induce a life-threatening traumatic state, which I articulated. Client is repeatedly stonewalled as they ask for help, and more business, more trust, more responsibility flows into that organization. That is not the equation. The equation is we put the safety and well-being of our clients, our students, our participants, our therapeutic patients first. And we do a good job. And we disclose what we can and cannot do. And trust is sustained and earned with hard work, and it is rewarded with sustainability. There is an interesting moment in every Donald Trump's life, and every President Clinton's life, and every CEO's life, and every high facilitator's life, in every one of our own lives, when something we have done that has been against the principles of our own soul, of our own ethics, of our own conscience, of best practices, that not a single person would look at and say, oh, I'm so glad that's happening, because that's what we need from our teachers, therapists, and students. More sexual abuse of sexual abuse survivors. There's not been a single one of us that has not faced a moment in which we have the choice to do the hard work of bringing our inadequacies to light, apologizing, making amends, seeking to learn, protecting those around us from similar blind spots, and rebuilding that trust. Something Johnson & Johnson did when someone started putting razor blades and messing with some of the Tylenol. They recalled millions of dollars worth of inventory on the off chance that someone might get hurt. And they recommended another brand because they put, in that instance, their client's safety first. And the brand stayed strong. Versus other companies that when they hear that some of their clients might be dying, might be getting sick, might be experiencing tremendous stress, spend that money not growing and changing and protecting the public, but controlling and suppressing information. And as we speak, the high facilitators are spending what is perhaps donor 501c3 nonprofit money to hire a court, not to expand human awareness, not to own their responsibility and inadequate response, or to make amends, or to apologize. They are spending $1,000 to try and shut this website down. President Trump, we have watched in amazement, dig himself into a hole that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. How could he do this? What was he thinking? Why? And yet, is this not, in another meta conversation, in which you might treat this website as a dream, as a conversation in the psyche of America, between those parts in us that want to speak our deepest truths, and those parts in us that want buying into the culturally stimulated shame that say that so much of what we think and what we feel is not acceptable, is bad, goes into a frenzied pitch of denial in the most irrational of ways. A nation that elects a president that is filled with a history of betrayals, incompetence, denials, bluster, chauvinism, and somehow expects an honorable presidency of great leadership, is a schizophrenic nation. A community or a facilitator body that protects practices that psychotherapists, trauma specialists, state license boards, courts, basic human decency says is not the way to go, because we can't challenge the label. We can't challenge the label. The Human Awareness Institute must survive, even if it means the controlling and suppression of awareness. The facilitators cannot be touched, even if they are facilitating life-threatening traumatic experiences. The truth cannot be known, even when the blind spot is precisely what allows an abusive cycle to continue for now 15 years. I want to invite you into the paradigm of being doctors, because a doctor follows a path of thought and action that, when successful, leads to healing and well-being. A doctor looks at a body of information, be that a doctor of psychology, a doctor in a failing country or a failing business. They look at symptoms. And what they're looking for is a pattern of imbalance, a pattern of missed opportunity, a pattern of irrationality, a pattern of dis-ease. They're diagnosing a pattern. Now, this is what every healthy therapist does with their patient. They help the patient see where the dis-ease is. And the dis-ease is a symptom of imbalance. If you think of the healthy psyche as a bicycle wheel in which one can freely flow through the full range of emotions, through the full range of psychological states, and where each psychological state and emotion accurately reflects the moment, not the past, not the future, the moment. So that when someone's fucking your daughter and raping your wife and killing innocent people, you feel terrified and rage and angry, and you do release adrenaline and cortisol, and you do everything that it takes to stop that aggressor. And then when it's over, when the threat has subsided, and when the root causes are understood, you come back to the gratitude that perhaps, hopefully, they're not dead. Hopefully, there are things that can be rebuilt. The house didn't burn down entirely. And you reflect the new state. And in this way, our psychological state is a mirror in ecological relationship with our environment and a message on how to heal our environment. The best doctors, when they look at an abused child wetting their bed, having nightmares, giving terrified looks at their father, unable to focus on learning at school, unable to look people in the eye, the best doctors do not diagnose the child. They diagnose the family through the symptoms of the child. The intelligent healer in an ecological framework does not pathologize the individual. Rather, they turn their attention to what are the protocols and the practices of this culture and environment, this family, this school, this culture, and how have those protocols been interacting with this individual such that a healthy, innocent child born with a profound possibility of liberation and transformation, growth and love and well-being, has been reduced to a cowering, traumatized state that has been so fixated, meaning the trauma has been so consistent, that they've built an identity around the traumatic wound, and that's who they feel they are, because there hasn't been cessation and healing, and the environment in their world has never let up. And they're too young to not take it personally. A young child takes everything personally. A healthy doctor diagnoses the environment from the behavior of the participants, knowing that different aspects of the environment, every environment has its strengths and its weaknesses, its public image and its shadow. Every child has its unique strengths and weaknesses, and when certain weaknesses in the individual get hit broadside by the dysfunctions in the environment, we see a collapse of the healthy ego, which initially trying to defend itself and getting whacked down in many cases by abusive elements that do not want to own their own shadow. You'll find adult men and women in different cases threatening 6-year-old children to kill them if they tell so-and-so, if they tell the secret. In my own experience, realizing I could not contain the energy that had been dumped into my first psychedelic session, that had been warped and twisted in a number of ways by Peter Sandel, that I could not contain his delusion that this had nothing to do with him because it was endangering people's lives, and had to ask for help from the only people I knew to turn to, the high facilitators who had stated over and over again their commitment to my winning and everyone else winning, and who had trained and recommended Peter. Surely this was not what they had intended. But this was not a high issue, according to every high facilitator and board member. So one of the meta conversations is, what does an American man, if you don't know the profile of an American man, very emotionally illiterate. I mean, I'm not differentiating that from women so much, but we don't learn a single emotional state in high school. We don't learn how to transmute emotions. We don't learn how to deal with trauma. We don't learn how to deal with heartbreak and overwhelm, other than one thing. We learn one thing, that the more emotional you are in America, the more you will be beaten, shamed, humiliated, dissociated from, and blamed. Under various chauvinistic statements, but that boil down to, oh, you're being too emotional. Sure, you were raped. Sure, you were this. Sure, you've got fucked over by another therapist. Sure, no one did this. Sure, another sociopathic woman has just dumped all over you and left you. And sure, you're exhausted and tired and don't want to live again. But don't be so emotional about it. Be polite. Maintain the facade. Say something witty. And if you can't do that, then at least have the decency of owning that you failed to maintain the social mask we all carry to continue our emotional illiteracy for another generation, and just go and feel bad about yourself and don't bother us. Just get out of view so that we can all continue being great. Isn't it wonderful listening to Trump talk about how America is number one and all that? So you can just pretend that everything's fine and just keep up the act. And when you feel better, if you survive, well, then just come back and we'll accept you back into the circle. And nobody will have learned anything. That's how we like it. Nobody will know anything. We love our ignorance. And we can continue the status quo. And the question in the meta conversation of this website is there an alternative? Because yes, the high facilitators did refuse to read my emails. Yes, they did refuse to apologize. Yes, they did refuse to bring in psychological help. Yes, they did refuse to bring in a mediator. Yes, they did refuse to bring in trauma education to the team. Yes, they did refuse to make it public. Yes, they did cut off my email account so I couldn't tell anyone. And yes, they did tell me they would like to keep it secret and were not even telling the staff at the high office, courtesy of Ann Watts. But is there another way? When a leadership, be that the president, be that the high facilitators, be that an abusive uncle, be that a parent, is there a way that someone in a state of complete psychological collapse and physical exhaustion can do something to advocate for themselves and, by extension, every abused and traumatized individual in this country, which, despite the facade of ignorance and negligence, is estimated as high as 60%. That there are 60% of us who are trauma illiterate for the most part, but are demonstrating symptoms of unresolved trauma, key being violence. 1 in 3 domestic relationships in America contain domestic violence, a traumatic symptom. Compulsion and addiction, be it to a substance or work or sex, be it to thinking, be it to any other thing, a compulsion and addiction is a coping mechanism that an individual uses when they are in psychological terrain they do not have the training and support to deal with. And so they direct all their attention to something that is rapid and repetitive, and the focus is to create a narrow band, repetitive loop of something that will block out the wide-angle view of the many pains, overwhelms, and griefs that are in our lives and in our psychic state that we do not know how to deal with. So, if you are someone or know someone who has been the recipient of violence or the initiator of violence, if you are someone or know someone who is crippled in shame, if you are someone or know someone who is dealing with deep depression and dissociation, if you have an addiction, if you have a compulsion, and if you are trauma illiterate, you do not understand the biology of trauma, how it needs to be worked with, what creates trauma, how it messes with brain chemistry, you are a victim of an emotionally illiterate culture that is working overtime. Are you keeping busy? Are you keeping busy? Are you keeping busy? It's working overtime to avoid and push out all of the knowledge that would help us understand what's going on in our own psyches, in our own country, in our own communities, in our own facilitator body. Well, this site is a question. Is there something that you can do about that? Is there something I can do about that? Is there? And your response to this website is the answer. Because in some of the traumatic literature, in our country, Bessel van der Kolk is the leader over 40 years of pushing against the ignorance-based framework of Veterans Administration, et cetera, to try and bring and rediscover this constantly suppressed phenomena of trauma. In our country, Bessel van der Kolk. In Germany, it is Alice Miller. Can we bring attention? Can we learn? Bessel van der Kolk, in some of his work, talks about the danger of abuse survivors bringing issues of authoritative abuse to community, meaning that we demonstrate in the United States a sociopathic tendency to disown, blame, shame, and refuse help to the victim of abuse, particularly when the abuser has a station of power. Thus, the parents of abused boys with the Catholic Church, if you watch the documentary Mea Culpa Maxima, tend to blame their children and make them go to the Catholic Church to confess their sins of talking against the power structure, while the Vatican sets up a special screening station to move pedophiles from one district where they are known because their abuse has come to light, to a nice plush center where they get to talk with other pedophiles about the best strategies for keeping it secret, and then are moved to another parish where nobody knows they're abusive and introduced as if nothing is wrong with absolutely no consequences, except the children of these abused clergy are systematically dishonored and shamed, ignored, patronized by the entire establishment, including in some cases their own parents. And if you watch the heartbreaking story of these young abused deaf men, target because they're the least likely to, in a boarding school, be able to stick up for themselves. Well, I'm also in that category as someone with Asperger's, as a sensitive, as someone that finds it very difficult to find social relationships that feel safe to me. That's one of the symptoms of childhood abuse. That feel safe to me, that I can calm down in, that are sustainable. This creates a lot of dependency on a professional relationship, which I have used. I've paid more than $150,000 for more than 30 practitioners. And it's very sad to look back and realize how many traumatic symptoms I brought to many of these people and have them do the typical Freudian BS of say, interesting, well, keep talking, and do absolutely nothing about it. Not, gee, you've demonstrated 7 traumatic symptoms. Do you know anything about trauma? Have you been abused as a child? What would that look like? Has your father ever done? Oh, you are an abuse survivor. You've got symptoms of complex PTSD. And this environment is terrible for you. So why don't you read these books, do this, keep yourself safe, and then come back next week, as opposed to the typical, very interesting, pay me another $150 and you can repeat it again next week. It is an outrage how ignorant so many of our therapists and professionals are, and it is an outrage how self-centered many of our therapeutic professionals are. After all, they're Americans in a meat-first culture, and they can't ruin their lives to inconvenience themselves just to help patients who have been abused. They've got incomes to earn and protocols to follow, and they read a little course on how to say, very interesting, see you next week, and now people are complaining at them. I mean, what's how unfair. How unfair. And so one of the other questions is, can this website, this body of material, bring some literacy, some fresh air into the pockets, in many cases, the deep pockets of blindness and incompetence on a therapeutic level? Now, this blindness is sustained actively by the Human Awareness Institute, who insists, in addition to the fact that it is not a high issue, that high facilitators abuse high participants regardless of the circumstances, on tape, by the way. There's a 10-hour recording. There's no question of he said, she said. You want to listen to the tape? You can listen to Our dear Peter Sandhill, recommended and trained by every high facilitator, asking a therapeutic patient to first take way more drugs than he wants to. Secondly, push for that. Thirdly, say he's absolutely going to take a rock-solid stand for his safety. And then, lo and behold, a few hours later, first, he didn't tell his wife. Second, he's not going to follow facilitator guidelines. And finally, there he is, kissing and talking about lifetimes with a heterosexual man on drugs in a suicidal state. And then, when shit hits the fan, this is not a High issue. This is not a Peter issue. Peter was very clear, just like High is, that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. It's amazing reading Peter's recordings and emails. If you want to know what denial looks like, it's a therapist taking $175 an hour to sexually abuse a patient on drugs, and then Peter hired a shaman to confirm his own certainty that this was not his issue. And he told me, my wife says it's not, the facilitators is not. You want to know what denial looks like? Just listen to Peter Sandhill's voices. But the question is Peter Sandhill and that protocol of denial a threat to the Human Awareness Institute? Or, in which case you should support the lawsuit to shut down this website. Or is the ignorance, lack of training, ethical negligence, and poor coping strategy when negligence is brought to the high facility, is that the problem? Or is it the participant? Is it the participant that is the problem? That what we need to do to solve this problem is for participants not to trust the high facilitators when they say that what they're doing. And if they do, it's the participant's fault. Because, well, we just said we were great at this, and you were supposed to know what to ask us. You were supposed to know more than we did so that you could protect yourselves from us, because it's not on us. And so if you want to look at defense, this is an opportunity to look at what beautiful New Age defense looks like. Because Peter Sandhill had nothing but love for me. And Ann Watts loved me and wanted to make sure that I understood that her love was not going anywhere. And this organization is committed to the entire world winning. I mean, what they're doing about that is hard to say, but the entire world winning. And they cannot be bothered to read angry emails from a heartbroken participant who has been induced into a traumatic state by one of their own. I mean, give us a break. We're trying to teach love, intimacy, and sexuality. We've got another workshop to teach. We cannot spend this time owning our own stuff. And I just wish you could get how much we love you, and go away, please, and just have your mental and emotional and physical breakdown outside of our view and without the ability to tell anyone about it. Because even though it isn't a high issue, people might, in their stupidity, think that it was a high issue for a high facilitator to sexually abuse a high participant. They might think that. They might not understand the extenuating circumstances. And because we don't want any confusion from the ignorant public that this could actually be a high issue, we've got to suppress the story. And because we don't want to spend our own money suppressing the story, let's spend donor tax-free money to shut down the website, because there's nothing to be learned here. We already decided that 3 years ago without even discussing it with the abuse survivor. The high facilitators have met about this more than 5 times on record, and I've never been invited to a single meeting. You want to learn how to lose, and you want to learn how to lose big, and you want to know how to destroy the trust of a community and an entire ethical organization, watch the Hive facilitator protocol behind doors. Read the emails, look at the details, ask the question. And then if you want to go really deep, look at the way we each do the same thing. Look at the fact that we were born into the same culture that taught the Hive facilitators how to cover up abuse, and that rewarded our parents for covering up their abuse, and that for a long time rewarded our presidents for covering up our abuse. And our modern presidents are rather angry that they don't get the same pass that some of the earlier presidents got. They look back at all the secret sexual affairs of the Kennedys, and it's like, it's so unfair, isn't it? I mean, what's a modern president to do if every time they fuck around and lie and cheat, they've got to have the press? I mean, goodness gracious, what has America come to if presidents actually have to have the press holding them accountable for their own protocols? It's outrageous. But it is an outrage that we have an opportunity to deal with, either as participants in the cover-up or as participants in sustained abuse. We can choose again to attack the messenger. Oh, he broke confidentiality there. I don't like his angry tone. I don't like his angry tone. In fact, if we could only rape and abuse our children more effectively, and they were like the old children who behaved, and talked civilly to the people violating them and beating them, then this country would go somewhere again. But these new namby-pamby, they scream, they talk back. I hate you when you beat me. I hate you when you're a hypocrite. We don't like these children, little bitches. Where's their gratitude? If we could only dominate and silence the abuse survivor like we did in the past, that's what we need to do more of. More controls on communication. So there's a conversation going on in each one of us as our wounded parts surface. And we say, oh my God, is this going to ruin my public facade of being the cheerful, diverter of all the family abuse history? My husband likes me to be all chirpy and fine and dissociative around sex rather than bring up some of the deep-seated anger about the fact that I know he's having an affair and this and that and the other. And, is the truth coming up the enemy that needs to be fought again? Or is the coping strategy of communication control that has worked for so long in central power structures, be they centralized government, centralized servers, centralized media, is, despite the outcry of those elements of corruption within the power structure, despite the outcry that Bitcoin is actually escaping the fact that we want to be able to create fiat money and manipulate it around and do this and do that, despite the fact that WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden are enemy number one for telling the truth about our own shadow in our own public use of money against our own constitution, that these people are the enemy and must be shot. They must be hunted down. That we must spend public money to persecute the people bringing truth to light because it's a matter of national security. For what? Security for Americans or security for the old power structures that are so threatened with the chaos and the liquidity of change, with the uncertainty of new paradigms coming down into light? And so I invite you to explore this on a number of levels. Is this a site that your 17-year-old daughter could use to protest? Could she document a series of abuses in a way that might lead to support, or do you think your daughter would be shamed for being too emotional? Is this an educational site? Can someone in a state of incredible distress and pain and heartbreak and all of that, can they teach something? And does anyone want to learn about the shadow? Or is the community too committed to the positive facade? America is number one. Maybe you should go work in the White House. It's a great opportunity to perpetuate the facade. And on other levels, what is really necessary for a successful human relationship? And I have some great news on this front, because while I have gotten the message from every single high facilitator, it's too much, it's don't talk about that, that didn't happen. Well, I've gotten a resistance, and while not a single person in the high community has said, tell me all about it, this is a very interesting pattern, because this is not personal. Can you learn anything about the fact that you are in a community and in a country where someone can say, this is happening and there's a lot to be learned and done about this, please help, and not a single person responds and says, how can I help? I want to learn all about it. Can we learn something about that? Can we develop more compassion and empathy for ourselves if we understand that this is not personal? It's me today, your daughter the next day, your mother the next day, your grandfather the next day, it's you the next day. That our culture is profoundly inefficient. That our culture creates winners and losers. And having created a loser by juxtaposing them with a winner, then shames and punishes the loser. That's what our culture does. It's very good at it. And it loves the competitive masculine trait and emphasis of manic fear and sociopathic behavior to be one of the winner. Because in a game of musical chairs, where half the people are going to be losers and half the people are winners, it is the most sociopathic and strategic of people who always land on the winning chair. And these are precisely the people that are quite prepared to say, well, you're a loser, we don't want anything to do with you. So there's a very interesting mirror looking into the deeps of our culture and its many impacts. Now, cultures protect themselves from examination at all costs. Cultures are completely happy to sacrifice this child, that student, this girl, this woman, this rape survivor, this person who doesn't know how to get out of sexual trafficking. The culture is completely happy to sacrifice these people if it seems necessary to maintain the status quo, the sense of continuity of an existing power paradigm and protocol. This culture is not interested in you as an individual being. And all you have to do is start rippling up into the edges of the lines of this culture and confronting it, be it in this government office, in this government office, or in this high office, or in this high facilitator's private room, and you realize that there are commitments to agendas that have nothing to do with your well-being as an individual, but which posture as having everything to do with who you are. They posture everything. But if you say, well, this doesn't actually help me. I'm dealing with that with my fiance right now as I prepare for my marriage. The United States government has been nothing but hostile as it delays, demands money, necessitates endless form. And I can write to them and say, look, I have PTSD. I'm running out of money. Secure, healthy relationships are the most important element in PTSD. And you, my government, for some trumped up protocol on terrorism, which you seem to be promoting around the world with all the bombs you drop on innocent people, are the only one blocking this woman spending time with me in my own house. I can't even get a name. That's how sociopathic we are. So if you think, no, yes, they're interested in votes, and yes, there are people that originally came into this with good intention, for the most part, at least on the surface, but are any of these individuals going to get the red tape out of your way so that your happiness and love and well-being can increase, when it doesn't happen to be good for their careers because the system isn't designed to reward people's careers who emphasize the well-being of the public? They reward people's careers who emphasize the ease of the authority figures. Okay, so your tax money will be used again to harass you. Try going to policemen and getting any help around a burglar or whatever. If they show up at all, it's with mild boredom because they're too busy stopping you on every little traffic infraction around, and they have no interest in. I've had 4 burglaries, never the slightest bit of follow-up. But will the police get out of your way when they park in the middle of the road to bother some poor lady who turned left from the middle lane instead of the far right lane? No, they'll just block traffic and justify their existence by funding their own agency again. It's like, are we being served or are we being persecuted by our authorities? It's a very interesting question. I also look at that because one of the very interesting things that happened for me as the blindfolders fell off around the high facilitators, they fell off around my parents. As they fell off around my parents, they fell off around my government. And as they fell off in all of those areas, and I attempted to speak about it, they fell off around us as a public. Because you are the public. And one of the most interesting things in the documentary that is another offshoot of this project is, how do you respond? Are you angry at the negativity? Do you resent more information you don't know what to do with? Are you sure already, without looking at the facts, who the villain is? Do you have any solution other than punishing people by locking them up for $100,000 a year of our money? Do you have rehabilitation in mind? Do you know how to turn hate into joy or joy into hate? Do you want to learn? Are you going to read any of the books? Are you going to take a stand? For what? On what basis? Are you going to be informed? Will you hire a psychologist to review this material and websites to get a sense of what best practices are? Will you hire a business consultant to learn what was and wasn't good practices here so that you know how to protect an abuse survivor in the future, perhaps your own daughter? What will you do? Will you feel anything? Or just run the critic program? Oh, typo there. I didn't like his voice there. Potato chip, potato. No. What an ungrateful person after all we did for him. Okay, I know what this is. This is all self-pity and rubbish, and we're just going to get rid of it. Like, what is your voice around that? Who do you become when you are in the presence of enormous pain? That is not really, if you look closely, all about me or all about Hi, but is about our culture as a whole. It's about you. And it's about the world that you want to live in and the world that you do live in. And it's about the difference you can make. It's about you. So this site is about many things. It is about healing the deep isolation and loneliness that I've felt, having all the communication shut down and thrown back in my face. It is about bringing awareness to an abuse cycle that while we may not be able to initially eradicate from our country, we can certainly start by eradicating from our therapists and our schools. It's also about best practices. And I want to invite you to relate to best practices as medicine, medicine for wounds. And I want you to think of bad practices as poison. And that individuals, regardless of who they are, that administer best practices with good intentions, create healing. And that individuals, regardless of who they are, and in some cases, regardless of their intention, who administer bad practices in the form of a poison, create death, create illness. And this is a very important distinction, because the smiling doctor that injects arsenic into your bloodstream and kills you is not a good doctor, regardless of how much he smiles. The grumpy, ferocious jerk who gives you penicillin that saves you life may be a son of a bitch and insult you and give you all kinds of emotional diseases while curing your body. Depending on the circumstance, you may pick the grumpy, competent doctor or the cheerful and positive idiot. It depends on the situation. But if you can differentiate and become informed on best practices and evaluate each as an abstract protocol and reference it to some data, I've provided plenty of data and books from the dozens of books and the more than hundreds of hours of YouTube and other media that I've been learning about to try and piece together patterns and research. If you look at data and then look at people's willingness to look at data, you know, the alcoholic that assures you that the next drink is really going to be the last and it's for everyone's good and they've got to do it. You might ask them to look at the data. If they don't want to look at the data, you might say, are you really sure this is good for you, or are you just addicted to drinking? Look at the data. Look at the pillars of research and best practice in our culture. There are not many, but they are bright and they are clear. Bessel van der Kolk is one of my heroes in this area. So if you will look at the data, and if you will ask not who's doing it, or even why they're doing it, but what is being done, and then look at how close that is to the best practice based on research that you would want to be done for your daughter, for your brother, etc., you have a chance to depersonalize the issue, which it is not personal. You may have all kinds of reactions, positive or negative, around me, or both. That's not the point. You may have all kinds of emotional reactions, positive and negative, around individual facilitators. I thought Peter was a terrific guy. It was just that he kept fucking up my life and I was paying for it, and then it turned out he had no character or skill to clean up the mess. So terrific guy, terrible therapist. Unfortunately, when you diagnose, again, good doctoring, a terrible therapist who has been chosen, trained, and recommended without caveat with high and then protected with high, the attention should turn from Peter to the entire facilitator body. What did and didn't you do that was suboptimal to choose, train, recommend, fail to spot sustained abuse, and then protect that abuse at your client's risk, at the risk of your client's life? What did you do and not do to create that probability field? How often is it happening? Are you interested in? You see, but when they respond by, we're not going to read your email, this isn't a high issue, and we're not going to apologize, and we're going to cut off your email accounts, you have to look at, is this a protocol of a school that is keenly learning and staying on the cutting edge of best practices? Or are these a bunch of adult children afraid of getting caught, not knowing what to do, and going back to childhood contract resources of, let's hide and we didn't do anything wrong, no, we didn't do it, and it's just reflexes. And they're actually killing their own organization without any adult present to monitor what's going on. Is that the case? Well, if it is, you have to treat them like children with discipline and steady presence. I've told them, if necessary, we will end up in court, and you can explain to the judge why it is not a high issue for a high facilitator to administer mushrooms and MDMA and then get on top of them and kiss them and talk about lifetimes and then not be on time for sessions and not do this and lie about this and not tell his wife. And you can explain why this is not a high issue and has nothing to do with Sarah, his wife, and nothing to do with you. And then you can talk about how it isn't, how the emails need to be disconnected from students that need to talk about abuse, even though the research says they need community support. And you can talk about why you needed to hide it from your staff. And you can, no doubt, convince an intelligent and objective judge that you were acting in the public interest, by all means. And you can, no doubt, explain to a trauma therapist that even though you violated the laws of container, even though you violated the laws of dual relationship, even though you charged a client for prostitution, even though you were not trained and licensed, that you did know best and that your good intention should count for something. Because you are not the ordinary person. You're Donald Trump who's above the law. You see? We get the figureheads that show us patterns we don't want to deal with. And the question is, and it is a question, how far does it go? Where and why? Who enables it? Who is silent? That's the documentary. Because I feel that one of the biggest wounds that a trauma survivor has to deal with is the continual message from birth to, in this case, abusive therapeutic abandonment, that it's your fault. It's all about you. If you would just die, that's the suicide message, if you would just die and take everything you feel and know and just have it disappear, then our lives, committed to protecting our various secrets, could proceed more smoothly, and you wouldn't be such a problem for the shadow elements we don't want to talk about. If you could just die, you miserable wretch, you just keep existing, reminding us of what we didn't do right. If you would just die. And I want to show it's quite the opposite, that we're all born as innocent children, and barring a massive amount of abuse, grow up as healthy, loving adults. I didn't learn what that was until I was 42 years old, and I didn't learn it at high because I mistook language for substance. Wonderful when once you've dissociated a population and cut them off from their feminine and their right brain and their felt experience, you cram them into the language arena of the brain. Now all you have to do is manipulate words, and you manipulate the entire population, because they won't pay attention to what they feel. They'll pay attention to the meaning of the words. They won't pay attention to the fact that I'm collapsing with adrenal failure. They'll pay attention to, I love you. It's like, well, I want love. That's a good thing. I want that love. What do I have to do to keep that love? Oh, it's simple. Just don't tell anyone. Don't bring this issue up. Let it go back to sleep. You're loved. Everyone cares about you. It's a wonderful situation. Yes, there were a few mistakes. We're doing the best we can. Just go back to sleep. Blame yourself. Have a new addiction if necessary. Don't talk about the abuse. Can we count on you for that? Are you a player in the game? Or do we need to start punishing you, distancing ourselves from you? What can we do to convince you that this never happened? It's a very seductive call, be it from partners, be it from therapists, be it from governments, be it from parents, none of which want to admit that we have a lot of emotional and psychological disease in this country. And it's sad because our protocol is so uneducated that we don't seem to have grasped the fact that if we put 60% of Americans in prison for the many symptoms of unresolved trauma, we will collapse under the weight of our incompetence. We need to start understanding that when any person, an abuser or a victim, participates in certain protocols, it is a symptom of dis-ease that creates harm, and it is the community that must support and witness the healing. It cannot be done in secret. It must be done in the open. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the site. I'm Dane Rose, and I'm going to look for my little button and say goodbye.